£2,000 if you fail to fill one in. Then when you get home from wherever you have come from, you have to get a test on day 2 as well as day 8, and again you can be very heavily fined if you fail to comply and you fail to quarantine at home. As for people coming from the 35 red list countries, there are indeed Sheila, there are indeed measures to take them directly from their point of arrival in the UK to hotel quarantine, where they stay for 10 days as well, and again have to do 2 tests. But as for your points about lorry drivers and hotel quarantine for absolutely everybody, I want to be clear with the public. We keep all these measures under review insofar as it's necessary to take extra measures to protect this country against new variants of concern. Of course, we're going to do that. I think we'll go on to Tim from Northampton. And Tim from Northampton asks, it's been reported that studies have found vaccine antibodies to last only a few months. Does that mean that vulnerable groups vaccinated first will need to be prioritised for a second vaccination cycle before young people have even had their first? That is an extremely good question, but I think it's probably a question for clinicians rather than and scientists rather than for me. So I'm going to go to Chris first, or who would like to go first? Patrick, go ahead.
I think if you look at the antibody response to natural infection, which is probably the best data we've got in terms of long-term effects, you see them really lasting pretty well out to 6 months. We don't know a long time beyond that. And I think the expectation is that antibodies to vaccines will also last for a reasonable period. We don't know exactly how long, because obviously people haven't been vaccinated for a very long period. So you may see some slight decline, but on the whole, the antibody levels are holding up. The second thing to say is that the response to a vaccine is only part the antibody response. There are other parts of the immune system, T cells and memory cells and other things that are an important part of the overall response. And so I don't think there's any indication yet that vaccine effects are waning. That said, there will be a need to think about booster jabs for vaccines in the autumn, I suspect, particularly thinking about getting high level of immunity to cover things over the winter.
I think the additional thing just to add is that the second reason for having to do a second vaccine is if we got a variant that had a relative escape from our current vaccines, and that would be another reason why we might need to do revaccination.
Thanks very much, both, and thanks, Tim. Laura Koonsberg, BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The country's been through so much in the last 12 months, and so many people today are grappling with everything that's happened. Professor Whitty, Sir Patrick, and you, Prime Minister, can I ask, if there's one thing you wish you'd done differently in the last year, what would it be?
Well, I kind of had a feeling you were going to ask something like that, Laura, and you're absolutely right. And I think in retrospect, there are probably many things that we wished that we'd known, and many things that we wished that we'd done differently at the time in retrospect, because we were fighting a novel disease under very different circumstances, I think, than any previous government had imagined. I think the point I've made to you before, perhaps the single biggest thing the single biggest false assumption that we made was about the potential for asymptomatic transmission, and that did govern a lot of policy in the early days, or that misunderstanding about the reality of asymptomatic transmission certainly led to real problems that we then really had to work very, very hard to make up ground. But you know, we've been learning the whole time, and we're continuing to learn.
I mean, I just wish we knew then what we know now. I mean, we've learned an enormous amount about this virus, about how it transmits, about asymptomatic transmission, about how it spreads in different environments, about how to treat it. So there's a whole host of things that would have been nice to know then. The one thing that I think would have been really important earlier on is to have much better data on what was happening. And that would have required testing to be up and ready immediately, and it would have required the ability to get that information into a source and to be able to see it. We can monitor the epidemic really, really well now and understand when changes are taking place. We simply didn't have that at the beginning, and it was very difficult to know the speed at which things were moving and therefore make decisions based on the real-time data, which we can do now, and that would have made a big difference, I think.
I think the thing I'd add to that, I mean, I completely agree, obviously, with both of those ones, is that our understanding not only of the speed of things in the UK was based on the fact we didn't have really sufficient data, and it wasn't until people started getting into hospital and dying we had a really better fix on how fast things were moving. So that was very important. But at an earlier stage, we had a much less of an understanding about how widespread the virus was in Europe, for exactly the same reason, actually, because of the lack of testing in Europe as well as in the UK. And so in retrospect, we now know the amounts of importation there were from Spain, from France, and from bits of Italy that didn't obviously have a problem, for example. But at the time, we didn't have that information, and that would almost certainly have led to slightly different approaches to how we did things.
Thanks, Laura. Dan Hewitt, ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You talked then about learning lessons. Reflecting today, do you wish you had locked down the country much sooner, both in the spring last year and then again in the autumn? And a second, if I may, yesterday ITV News uncovered the most shocking and appalling housing conditions in Croydon, which experts have said are the worst they have ever seen. It poses serious questions for the landlord, Croydon Council. But we know that just under 500,000 people in England are living in substandard social housing. What have you done as Prime Minister to help people living in poor social housing conditions?
Well, Dan, first of all, on your question about the timing of the decisions that we took, these are very, very hard decisions, and there are no good outcomes either way, as I think all our viewers understand. All these consequences are very, very tough for people, and all I can say is we took all the decisions with the interests of the British people foremost in our hearts, and in an effort to protect the public and to prevent death and suffering. That was what we were trying to do at all stages. Though doubtless there will be a moment to properly to review, to learn lessons, and to make sure that we learn those lessons down for future pandemics of a kind that I'm sure that there will be. And on Croydon, which I believe is currently controlled by the Labour Party, I remember when I was mayor of Croydon and everywhere else in London, building huge quantities of social housing and encouraging development of all kinds in Croydon. And I greatly regret the story and the facts that you've uncovered just now. What we've got to do as a country is work together to build back better from the pandemic, and particularly to give people the opportunity not just to rent their homes, rent their social home, and perhaps the single biggest thing we've done is increase the local housing allowance to right the way up the local rental average. So we put much more money into the pockets of those who need to rent locally to support those on the lowest incomes. That's probably one of the most important things we've done to support social housing. But in the end, you've got to build more homes, and that is the ambition of this government. We want to build 300,000 homes a year, and if you look at our planning reforms, everything that we're doing to drive that forward, that's what we can do. Croydon, as it happens, offers fantastic opportunities for more development, as I'm sure you know, and as I well remember. And it would be a great thing if the current Mayor of London, without putting too fine a point on it, Dan, addressed the issue himself, and that's what I would like to see. Let's go to Beth Rigby of Sky News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Finally, after a very long and hard year, the end is now in sight. But no one can doubt the huge scar COVID is going to leave on our economy, on public health, and on the lives of all our children. And to each of you, what do you think the main social, health, and economic challenges will be? And will we be grappling with the legacy of COVID and the past year for the rest of our lives? Thank you.
Beth, I certainly think that this is something that we will all remember and be dealing with in different ways for probably, for certainly in my case, for as long as I live. It's been an extraordinary moment in our history, and a deeply difficult and distressing period. If I look at the problems that we face at the moment, in addition to the continuing healthcare threat that we face, and we must be realistic. There is another wave building on the European continent amongst our friends. We will see it wash onto our shores. I've no doubt. The extent to which it affects us will depend, as Chris was saying, on the strength of the fortifications we've now built against it by the vaccine program. That's one problem we've still got to deal with. But the legacy issue, I think, for me, leaving aside all the other backlogs, is education, and it's the loss of learning for so many children and young people. That's the thing we've got to focus on now as a society, and that I think is an opportunity to make amends, because there's going to be this year a group of kids going from primary to secondary school. There'll be perhaps 90,000, it's calculated, who will be behind in their basic literacy, unable properly to read or write. 90,000 more as a result of COVID. A huge, between 3 and 5 months of education has been lost. And of course the detriment falls the hardest on the kids who've needed attention the most, and who have been unable to, who haven't been provided properly with the time and the support that they need. So that's why we've been working so hard as a government to make up that gap with everything that we've done through the holiday support, through investment in the catch-up funds, the 1.7 billion that we've put in, everything we've done to roll out laptops across as many kids as we could. And that's why, in addition to the work that Gavin Williamson is doing, Sir Kevin Collins is the Education Recovery Commissioner, who is leading that work of recovery. And what Sir Kevin and his team are going to be focusing on is not just remediating the damage, repairing the damage, plugging the gaps, but I think there's a chance to learn from the pandemic and all the ways in which actually some teachers and some schools have done brilliantly at discovering how you can teach through Zoom, discovering ways in which we can actually teach better in some ways through the technology that we've been using, but also maximizing our use of tutoring as well, so that kids who have fallen behind and kids with potential get one-to-one tutoring, where we think that can make a difference. And I'm not going to pretend that everything is going to work first time. And we've been through a long period where we've got used to things not working first time, but we're going to persevere. And I think that we will start to make a big impact on those kids' lives. It's been an absolutely unimaginable year for school children, for university students, for everybody in education. They've put up with incredible privations in order to help us, the whole country, get through. And our future as a country depends on us now repaying that generation, making sure they get the education they need. So that's for me, that's the biggest priority.
Shall I add? I mean, just narrowly on the health side, COVID itself, I anticipate being with us for the foreseeable future. We'll have to deal with it in some form or another. Now, science has extraordinarily responded to this. If you think where we were a year ago, vaccines, drugs, diagnostics, and understanding of the virus, we will be able to bring it down to manageable levels, but it's not going away. So we will have COVID for the indefinite future. Second thing, which is a health issue from COVID, and we've said this right from the beginning, this is one of the things we were very concerned about right from the beginning collectively, is that the impact on other aspects of the health service will have some delayed effect. There will be people for example, who've probably delayed having screening. And I would really encourage people to take that up for things like cervical cancer, breast cancer, which run the risk of people having a delayed diagnosis. The same will be true for people who've not gone for routine or elective care they normally would. That's a medium-term issue, but potentially could be a significant one if we are not absolutely alive to it. And the third one, which again we recognise fully from the beginning, and one of the things that's made so many of the decisions very difficult, is much of what's happened in lockdown has the risk of making people who are on the borderlines of deprivation in more difficult economic and other circumstances. And we all know that has a massive impact on long-term health implications. So that could have really quite a long-term implications, again, if we don't take it seriously. I suppose the final point I'd make is that COVID has shone a light into areas of healthcare. The people who are being affected by COVID now are the same families, the same places, the same people who are affected by so many other diseases. And I think we really need to look at this very seriously, because these, the same people will be suffering from the diseases of smoking, of other diseases of deprivation and so on. We've really got, I think, to take this very seriously as a country and as a community.
I mean, clearly today is a day to think about all the people who've died this year as a result of this terrible virus, but also the people who've suffered both physical and mental health, and all of the consequences that come with that, and the societal effects. And in September, I asked the British Academy to get their academics together to try and address the question, what might the societal impact, long-term societal impacts of COVID be? And they've got 200 of the brightest and best of the fellows of the British Academy, and a report was published today trying to give an evidence base for what that might look like. And there are a number of things in there, ranging from the topics that have been covered, from education to inequality to health, that I think are highlighted and have profound implications for how policy might evolve, but what's important is that there's an evidence base now to work on, and that report, I think, will be useful for policymakers going forward.
Thank you. Thanks both, and thanks, Beth. Ben Riley-Smith, Telegraph.
Thank you. A question for the Prime Minister and also the government scientists, which actually picks up on Chris Whitty's comments there. We're a year into this pandemic. Should the UK government's policy objective now be to eradicate COVID, or simply bring down cases to the lowest possible levels?
Well, Ben, I think it's the second, in the sense that I'm not sure, listening to the scientists intently as I have for many, many months, I'm not sure that eradication makes sense in a globalized economy for one country alone. Plainly, as an objective for humanity, it's right, and we should aim for it. But that's my view. But I'd hand to Chris and Patrick.
I mean, I regret to say that I think the chances of eradicating this disease, which means getting rid of it absolutely everywhere, are as close to zero as makes no difference. We've only achieved eradication of one disease, which is smallpox, with a phenomenally effective vaccine over a very long period of time, literally hundreds of years. So, and others have come close, but it's very difficult. In terms of eliminating from the UK, this is a disease which is got most people who have it have mild symptoms, or in some cases no symptoms, who can then transmit it. That makes it very difficult to find. We have good vaccines, very good vaccines, but they're not 100% effective vaccines. We have good tests, but not everybody who needs testing is tested, and really would strongly encourage people to do that. I think everyone agrees we can get COVID rates right down. That should be absolutely our aim, and to get cases of people who die and have severe disease as close to zero as we can. If we can go further, who would say no? But I think if you talk to anybody who looks at this really seriously, who understands how infectious diseases work, I don't think there's anybody who thinks eliminating from the UK or eradicating globally for any long period of time is a realistic prospect at this point in time.
I agree. I think get numbers as low as we can. Don't expect that this is going to disappear. Expect that there will be recurrences of infections, particularly in winter, and this will become a circulating virus as others have done over thousands of years. And I think this is unfortunately what we have. I think the chances of eradication, true eradication, i.e. zero, are in themselves very close to zero, as Chris has said.
Thanks, Ben. Dominic Yateman, Metro.
Hi, thank you, Prime Minister. When the time comes, as you put it, to describe this period to future generations, how will we explain why Britain suffered the highest death toll in Europe and the deepest recession? And secondly, if I may, people who own holiday homes overseas, such as your father, for instance, will be exempted from the travel ban affecting everyone else. Would you advise people to buy a second home abroad if they want to have a holiday this year? And a quick one for the scientists, if I may. Are the new variants enough to explain why the second wave killed more people than the first?
Dominic, on your overall question about your sort of league table question, I think I will respectfully go back to the answer that you'll have heard from this podium many times, which is that the pandemic is, alas, tragically, is not over yet across the world. We mourn the loss of every life that's been lost in this country, and we're going to continue to protect everyone to the best of our ability. But this is not over, and I think that international comparisons are premature at this stage. And on your second point, really about global travel and holidays, a lot of people do want to know about what's going to happen on the holiday front, and I know there's a great deal of curiosity and interest. All I can say is it is just too early to say, and so my advice is to everybody to wait for the Global Travel Task Force to report. We've heard already that there are other European countries where the disease is now rising, so things certainly look difficult for the time being. But we'll be able to say more, we hope, in a few days' time. I certainly hope to be saying some more by April the 5th, and that's I think the best you can hope for there.
In terms of the question you asked us, Patrick may want to add to this, but it's very difficult to be absolutely confident exactly what happened. We're very confident that the majority of people who died in the second half of the second wave, which is by far the bigger one, were from the new variant. So first thing is that has completely taken over really in the UK, and that is now the variant. So that is what has driven a lot of these. Now, working out what would have happened had the new variant not arrived is really difficult to do, and I think anyone who claims that they can with confidence is misunderstanding the problem. But the height of the peak would undoubtedly been a lot lower had that new, much more transmissible and probably more fatal, but that is more questionable. But the transmissibility I don't think is questionable. Had that not arrived, I think the pattern of the second wave in the UK would have been very different. And what you can see when you see what's happening in continental Europe at the moment is the effects of the arrival of the B117 variant is actually causing problems in other countries as it has caused problems now. I share the PM's caution about trying to do international comparisons, although I will make a technical point that if you're going to do it, it's probably best to concentrate on excess all-cause mortality, just because that's easier to compare between countries. But that's a minor technical point. The general point is we had a bad outcome. Many other countries had a bad outcome. What we want to try and do is to minimise mortality in the future and learn lessons from the past.
Nothing to add.
Thank you very much, Chris and Dominic. Emilio Casalicchio from Politico.
Thanks, Prime Minister. I've got a couple of related questions for you and one for the scientists, if that's okay. The EU wants us to share our order of vaccines from a plant in the Netherlands called the Hallex factory, and it's been making threats to impose a ban on the jabs coming to Britain if we refuse to share. Can you answer yes or no whether we're going to share them, which presumably would help prevent that third wave in the EU from reaching our shores? And the bigger question is, can we afford to share them? Meaning, if we give however many million doses to the EU, will we still have enough to keep our rollout on course? And the question for the scientists are that there are fears that if the EU does place an export ban on some vaccines to the UK, we might retaliate and get into a kind of trade war. Some of those fears are coming from Pfizer, which has warned that if we stop sending vaccine components made in Britain to the EU, their production could grind to a halt, and presumably that could harm our overall vaccine supplies as well. So do you worry that a tit-for-tat trade war with the EU could put the UK rollout at any risk at all?
Oh, thanks very much, Emilia. Let me go first and say that we're all fighting the same pandemic across the whole of the European continent and indeed around much of the world. And vaccines are an international operation. They're produced by collaboration between great international scientists. It's a fantastic thing to see how they've been developed, and we'll continue to work with European partners to deliver the vaccine rollout. All I can say is that we in this country don't believe in blockades of any kind of vaccines or vaccine material. Not something that this country would dream of engaging in, and I'm encouraged by some of the things I've heard from the continent in the same sense.
The only thing I'd say is it's a miracle we've got vaccines. It's been an incredible effort by scientists from around the world. We've got companies, academic groups, others who've discovered, produced vaccines right the way around the world. And in a sense, the clue to this is in the title of the problem we've got, which is a pandemic. It affects everywhere. This is something that's only going to be sorted out when everybody is sorted out, and therefore it needs an approach which takes an international approach to how we solve this problem of the virus.
Sorry, I'll just add to that, and we're all basically saying the same thing, which is every single one of the vaccines we have available depends on science from multiple countries for its intellectual origins, for its immediate recent development, and in almost all cases for its manufacturing and distribution. It's absolutely essential we see this as an international problem. And scientists collaborate the whole time. So Patrick and I talk to our counterparts in Europe the whole time. Scientists up and down the UK, all 4 nations of the UK, are talking to their counterparts in Europe and in every other nation as appropriate the whole time. This should be seen as an international issue.
And there's no point in one country being immunised on its own. We need the whole planet to be inoculated. Thank you all very much. Thank you.